Oh, hello there, dear. Come in, come in. Don't just stand there letting the warmth out. Find a comfortable spot. The green chair by the window is always my favorite, especially when the afternoon sun decides to pay a visit. There we are. Let me just pour you a cup. 2 sugars, is it, or do you take it plain? I always have 2. A habit my dear Arthur got me into. Quaya always said, a little sweetness makes the day brighter. And oh, he was rarely wrong about such things. You know, it's funny the things that can send your mind tumbling back through the years. It's not always the big things, the birthdays, or the anniversaries. Sometimes, it's the quietest of whispers from the past. This morning, it was the sound of the old grandfather clock in the hallway chiming the hour, bong bong bong, just like it has 1,000 times before. But today, the sound carried a different weight. It carried the echo of a promise made on a cold, windswept morning in the autumn of 1958. I was just looking at this little thing before you arrived. Nan picks up a small, slightly tarnished silver locket from the table beside her. It doesn't look like much now, I suppose. The clasp is a bit loose, and if you look closely, you can see a tiny dent right here on the edge. But this locket, oh, this locket holds the beginning and the end of a story that shaped the very woman I am today. It was a gift, you see. Not from a suitor, not for a birthday. It was a parting gift from my mother. Back in those days, our world was so much smaller, and yet the distances felt so much greater. We lived in a small village nestled in the countryside, a place where everyone knew your name, your parents' names, and probably what you had for breakfast. My father was a good man, a strong man, but a man of the earth. He believed in hard work, in the turning of the seasons, and in the life we had always known. But my mother had a spark of something different in her eyes. She'd read books that found their way to our little corner of the world, and she'd talk of cities with lights that never slept and opportunities that stretched as far as the eye could see. She saw that same spark in me, I think. I was 19, and I had a dream. I wanted to be a nurse. Oh, you should have seen my father's face when I first said it out loud. It was as if I'd announced I was planning to fly to the moon. Nursing. He'd scoffed, his hands still caked with the soil from the fields. That's no life for a respectable girl. It's city work, dirty work. Your place is here, helping your mother. But my mother, she understood. She saw the fire in my heart, the yearning for something more than the path that was laid out for me. The city was a 3-day journey by train back then, a world away. To my father, it was a place of sin and sorrow. To me, it was a beacon of hope. The argument went on for weeks. The air in our little cottage grew thick with unspoken words and heavy sighs. My father wouldn't budge. He forbade it. Absolutely forbade it. And in those days, a father's word was law. I remember one night, I was sitting by the hearth, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, and I was crying. Not loud, sobbing tears, but silent, hot tears that trickled down my cheeks and dripped onto my worn cotton dress. I felt like a bird with clipped wings. My mother came and sat beside me. She didn't say anything for the longest time. She just took my hand in hers, her skin rough from years of work but her touch so gentle. There are different kinds of courage, Ilara, she finally whispered, her voice barely louder than the crackling of the fire. There's the courage to fight, and there's the courage to build. Your father, he fights the land every day to provide for us. That is his courage. But you have the courage to build a new life. The night before I was to leave, she pressed this locket into my hand. It was her own mother's, she told me. Her most prized possession. Don't open it, she said, her eyes pleading with me. Not until you feel like you've truly lost your way. When you feel that you can't take another step, open it. It will remind you of the strength you carry within you. Promise me, Ilara. Promise you'll only open it then. I gave her my word. It felt like the most solemn vow I had ever made. The next morning, before the sun had even thought about rising, she woke me. She had packed a small suitcase for me with a few clothes, a loaf of bread, a small wedge of cheese, and the little money she had managed to save from selling eggs, hidden away from my father. It was a secret between us, an act of rebellion born from a mother's love. My father was still asleep as we crept out of the house. The air was bitingly cold, and the ground was slick with frost. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm of fear and exhilaration. At the edge of the village, where the dirt track met the main road, My mother hugged me so tightly I thought my bones might break. "Be good," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Be brave, and remember your promise." I watched her walk back towards our little cottage, a lone figure shrinking in the gray morning light, until she was swallowed by the mist. I stood there for a moment, the cold seeping into my coat, the silver locket cold against my palm. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. I had my mother's blessing, but I was also betraying my father's wishes. The weight of that promise, the weight of the locket in my hand, felt heavier than the suitcase I carried. That was the first step on a journey that would test me in ways I could never have imagined. And the ticking of that old clock today, it took me right back to that very moment, standing on that lonely road, with the whole world ahead of me, and no idea of the storms I would have to weather. What I didn't know was that the hardest part wasn't leaving home, but what I would find in the big, bustling city, and the people who would change my life forever. The train journey was a blur of rattling carriages, the rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels on the tracks, and a kaleidoscope of landscapes rushing past the window. Fields of green and gold slowly gave way to towns, then to sprawling suburbs, and finally to the city itself. Oh, the city! It was nothing like the pictures in my mother's books. It was a behemoth of brick and stone and smoke, a roaring, clamoring giant that seemed to swallow the sky. When I stepped off the train at Victoria Station, the sheer noise of the place hit me like a physical blow. The screech of train brakes, the hiss of steam, the cacophony of hundreds of voices echoing in the vast, arched hall. People rushed past me in every direction, a river of faces that were all stern, hurried, and completely indifferent to the wide-eyed girl from the country, standing frozen in their midst. I clutched my suitcase in one hand, and the locket in my pocket with the other, my knuckles white. For a terrifying moment, I wanted to turn right around, get back on the first train, and flee back to the silence of our village. I had an address, scrawled on a piece of paper, a boarding house for young women, that a distant cousin had mentioned in a letter years ago. Finding it was an ordeal in itself. The streets were a labyrinth, and the city buses were loud, lumbering beasts that I was too afraid to navigate. So I walked for what felt like hours, my cheap shoes pinching my feet, the city's unfamiliar smells filling my lungs, a strange mix of exhaust fumes, roasting chestnuts from a street vendor, and the damp, slightly sour smell of the river. The boarding house was a tall, narrow building with a stern-looking gray facade, run by a woman named Mrs. Higgins. She was as gray as the house itself, with a severe bun and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my worn coat and scuffed shoes. Rooms on the 4th floor. No gentlemen visitors. Lights out at 10. Breakfast is at 7 sharp. If you're late, you don't eat. Rent is due on Friday. In advance. My room was tiny, barely big enough for the narrow bed, a small wardrobe, and a single chair. A small, grimy window looked out onto a brick wall. The silence in that room was a different kind of silence from the one I knew back home. It wasn't peaceful. It was an empty, lonely silence that amplified the distant wail of a siren or the shouts from the street below. That first night, I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress and ate the bread and cheese my mother had packed. It tasted of home, and I had to choke back a sob with every bite. I felt the locket in my pocket, its cool metal, a small, solid comfort in this overwhelming new world. I remembered my promise not to open it. Not yet. The next day, I set out to find the nursing school. It was a grand, imposing building that made me feel even smaller and more insignificant. The woman at the front desk was brisk and efficient. She barely looked at me as she handed me a stack of forms. My heart sank as I saw the tuition fees. The money my mother had given me, which had felt like a fortune in our village, would barely cover the first term, let alone my rent and food. Desperation began to set in. For the next week, I walked the city, knocking on doors, looking for any kind of work. I was met with rejection after rejection. No experience, they'd say, or, we're looking for someone local. The city that had seemed like a beacon of hope from afar, now felt like a cold, impenetrable fortress. My small savings dwindled with each passing day. I started skipping meals, telling myself I wasn't hungry. The vibrant dreams that had propelled me from my home were fading, replaced by the gnawing ache of hunger and the sharp sting of failure. One evening, I was walking back to the boarding house, my feet aching and my stomach empty, when a sudden downpour started. The sky opened up, and in seconds, The streets were slick and gleaming under the gas. I huddled in a doorway, shivering, watching the city's residents hurry by with their umbrellas and their determined expressions. I felt invisible, like a ghost haunting the edges of their busy lives. It was in that moment of utter despair that I felt the smooth, round shape of the locket in my pocket. My fingers closed around it. The urge to open it, to see what message my mother had hidden for me, was almost overwhelming. I thought, this is it. This is the moment. I can't take another step. But then, I remembered my mother's face, her plea, the strength in her eyes. When you feel you've truly lost your way, she had said. Had I truly lost my way? Or had I just hit the first big wall? Giving up now would mean her sacrifice, her act of defiance against my father, was for nothing. I pulled my hand away from the locket as if it had burned me. No, not yet. I had to try one more time. Just then, a man, also seeking shelter from the rain, ducked into the doorway beside me. He was an older gentleman, with kind eyes and a tweed coat that had seen better days. He glanced at my soaked clothes and the despair that must have been written all over my face. "Quite a storm," he said, his voice gentle. I could only nod, my teeth chattering. "Tough day?" he asked. A lump formed in my throat. I nodded again, not trusting my voice. He smiled, a small, kind smile. "The city can be a cruel place when you're new. But it has a heart. You just have to know where to look. Are you looking for work, by any chance?" I looked up at him, surprised. "Yes, sir. Anything." He told me his name was Mr. Abernathy, and he owned a small bookshop just around the corner. His assistant had just left to get married, and he was looking for someone to help out. "It's not much pay," he warned. "But it's warm, it's dry, and you can read all the books you like." It felt like a miracle, a tiny flicker of light in the suffocating darkness. I started the next day. The shop was a magical place, a quiet sanctuary filled with the wonderful smell of old paper and leather. It was a world away from the noise and rush of the city outside. Mr. Abernathy was as kind as he had seemed. He was patient and taught me how to stack the shelves, handle the accounts, and talk to the customers. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt a sense of peace. I still dreamed of being a nurse, but the bookshop was a lifeline. It gave me a purpose, a small income, and a place to belong. I started saving every penny I could, my nursing school fund growing slowly but steadily. The city was still a city of strangers, but now it also held a corner of kindness. I hadn't opened the locket, and I was proud of that. I had found a foothold on my own. But I had no idea that my biggest challenge wasn't finding a job, but a person I would meet in that very bookshop, a person who would test my resolve and my heart in ways I never thought possible. The bookshop, Abernathy's Tomes and Tales, became my haven. It was a narrow, deep shop, crammed from floor to ceiling with books of every shape and size. Sunlight struggled to get through the dusty front window, so the inside was always bathed in the warm, golden glow of a few low-hanging lamps. The air itself felt thick with stories, and the dominant scent was a comforting perfume of old paper, leather bindings, and Mr. Abernathy's pipe tobacco. The constant, gentle ticking of a magnificent mantel clock was the shop's heartbeat. Mr. Abernathy was a widower, and I soon realized the shop and its patrons were his family. He was a fountain of knowledge and kindness. He taught me not just how to manage a shop, but about literature, about history, and about people. He would watch me as I carefully dusted a rare first edition, or recommended a book of poetry to a shy young customer, and he would get this little twinkle in his eye. "You have a gentle soul, Alara," he told me once. "It's a rare and precious thing in a city like this." My days settled into a comforting rhythm. I'd wake in my cold little room at the boarding house, but the thought of the bookshop would warm me. I'd work all day, losing myself in the quiet world of words, and in the evenings I would study. I bought old nursing textbooks from a second-hand stall and read them by the dim light of my bedside lamp, my dreams still very much alive. My savings were growing, slowly, painstakingly. Each shilling I tucked away felt like a victory, a step closer to my goal. I was still lonely, of course. The other girls at the boarding house were mostly factory workers or shop girls with different interests, and their boisterous chatter often made me feel more isolated. "By the way, dear, it makes me wonder, where are you watching from? What time is it there? It feels like you're right here with me in my little living room, but I know you could be anywhere in the world." I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. It's a marvel, isn't it? How we can share a moment like this from so far away. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, the bookshop. It was a chilly afternoon in early spring. The rain was tapping a soft rhythm against the shop window. Business was slow, and I was perched on a stool behind the counter, trying to mend a book with a broken spine. The little bell above the door tinkled, announcing a customer. I looked up and saw a young man shaking the rain from his coat. He was tall, with a mess of dark, curly hair that fell over his forehead and the most striking blue eyes I had ever seen. They were the color of a summer sky just after a storm. He wasn't handsome in a conventional, polished way. There was an intensity about him, a restlessness in the way he moved, as if he were brimming with an energy too big for his own skin. He gave me a quick, almost shy smile, and then immediately became absorbed in the shelves, his long fingers trailing over the spines of the books. I tried to go back to my mending, but I found my eyes drifting back to him. He moved with a quiet confidence, yet there was a vulnerability there too. After a while, he brought a slim volume of poetry to the counter. "Just this one today," he said, his voice deeper than I expected, as I took the book. Our fingers brushed for a fleeting second. It was like a tiny spark of electricity. I felt a blush creep up my neck. "That'll be 2 shillings and 6pence, please," I mumbled, focusing intently on wrapping the book in brown paper. He paid and lingered for a moment. "You like poetry?" he asked, nodding towards the book. "I do," I said, finding my voice. "Keats is a favorite of mine." His face lit up. "A thing of beauty is a joy forever," he quoted, his blue eyes sparkling. He understood the ache of things, didn't he? And just like that, we were talking. His name was Thomas, and he was a student at the art college nearby. He was a painter. He spoke about colors and light and shadows with a passion that was mesmerizing. He talked about his dream of capturing the soul of the city on canvas, its beauty and its grit. In his words, I heard an echo of my own secret longings, that same yearning for a life filled with purpose and passion. He started coming into the shop every few days. Sometimes he would buy a book, but often he would just come to talk. We would talk for hours, leaning against the tall bookshelves, our voices low so as not to disturb Mr. Abernathy, who would watch us from his desk with a knowing smile. Thomas told me about his difficult childhood, about growing up in a crowded tenement building with a father who drank too much and a mother who was always tired. Art was his escape, his way of making sense of the world. I found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't with anyone else. I told him about my village, about my dream of becoming a nurse, about the silent struggle with my father's disapproval. He listened, truly listened, with an empathy that made me feel seen and understood. He started waiting for me after I finished work. We would walk through the rain-slicked London streets, the gaslights casting a golden halo around us. He showed me his city, the hidden courtyards, the quiet parks, the view of the river from Waterloo Bridge at sunset. With him, the city was no longer a big, scary monster. It became a place of shared secrets and quiet beauty. I knew, with a certainty that was both thrilling and terrifying, that I was falling in love with him. It was a feeling as potent and intoxicating as the scent of the spring rain on the pavement. But it was also a complication, a beautiful, wonderful complication. My life had been a straight, narrow path towards one goal. Nursing school. Thomas was a detour I hadn't planned for. My savings were for my tuition. My focus was for my studies. This whirlwind of emotion was not part of the plan. One evening, as we stood on the bridge, the last light of day painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, he took my hand. His hand was warm and strong around mine. "Elara," he said, his voice soft, "when I'm with you, I feel like I can do anything. It's like you bring color to my world." He leaned in and kissed me. It was a gentle, tentative kiss, but it sent my world spinning. All my carefully constructed walls, all my single-minded determination, seemed to melt away in that one moment. I was 19 years old, standing on a bridge in the heart of London, in love with a penniless artist. My dream of being a nurse was still there, a steady flame in my heart, but now, a new fire had been lit right beside it, a fire that was bright and wild and unpredictable, and I had a sinking feeling that soon, I would be forced to choose between them. The locket in my pocket felt heavier than ever, a silent reminder of a promise I had made to a different life, a different version of myself. The months that followed were a beautiful, chaotic dance between my duties at the bookshop, my secret nursing studies, and my burgeoning love for Thomas. Our world was small and self-contained, a bubble of shared dreams within the vastness of London. We had no money for fancy dates, of course. Our courtship was a tapestry woven from simple threads, long walks along the Thames, sharing a bag of hot chestnuts on a park bench, and spending hours in art galleries where Thomas would explain the genius of Turner's use of light, or the raw emotion in a Blake etching. He would often set up his easel by the river, and I would sit nearby, reading one of my nursing textbooks. The clinical, precise language, a stark contrast to the romantic chaos of his canvas. He was trying to paint me, he said, but he could never quite capture what he saw. Your eyes, he'd say, frowning in concentration, they hold too many stories. It's like trying to paint the wind. Mr. Abernathy adored him. He'd let Thomas pay for his books with sketches and small paintings, many of which now hung on the bookshop's walls. That boy has a fire in his belly, he'd say to me with a wink, just like someone else I know. But beneath the surface of this idyllic romance, a current of anxiety was beginning to pull at me. My savings had reached a tipping point. I had enough. I finally had enough money to enroll in the nursing program for the first term. It was a moment I had worked towards for what felt like a lifetime. I held the bank book in my hand, staring at the numbers, and I should have felt nothing but elation. Instead, my heart was a tangled mess of joy and dread. Telling Thomas was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do. We were sitting in our usual spot in a little park overlooking the city. The sun was setting, and the sky was a symphony of bruised purples and soft grays. I have enough, Thomas, I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. For nursing school, I can enroll for the autumn term. I expected him to be thrilled for me, and he was, at first. He hugged me tightly, telling me how proud he was of my determination. But then, a shadow passed over his handsome features. A quietness settled between us. That's wonderful, Alara, he said, but his voice lacked its usual vibrancy. What will that mean for you? For us, I'll be busy, I admitted, my heart aching. The training is all-consuming, they say. We live in a dormitory at the hospital. The hours are long. The unspoken words hung in the air between us. There will be no more time for long walks. No more afternoons by the river. No more us. My art, he began, then stopped. He had just been offered a small exhibition at a local gallery. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was his first real chance. It was his dream taking its first breath, just as mine was. I was hoping you'd be there. I'm painting a new piece. It's for you. The choice I had been dreading was no longer a distant possibility. It was standing right in front of me, stark and unavoidable. It was the life I had fought for, the promise I had made to my mother and myself, versus the life my heart was now screaming for, a life with this passionate, brilliant, and penniless artist. The weeks leading up to the enrollment deadline were agonizing. Every moment with Thomas felt precious and tinged with sadness. We tried to ignore the looming decision, pretending that things could go on as they were, but it was a shared fiction. The tension was a silent third person in our relationship. I became irritable and withdrawn. I wasn't sleeping well, and even the comforting scent of the bookshop couldn't soothe my frayed nerves. One afternoon, I was cleaning out a box of old donations in the bookshop's storeroom when my hand closed on a small, leather-bound journal. The pages were filled with the elegant, looping script of a woman from the 1890s. She wrote of her love for a man her family disapproved of. A poet with more dreams than links. She wrote of the impossible choice between duty to her family and the call of her heart. Reading her words, written more than half a century before, felt like looking into a mirror. Her pain, her confusion, it resonated with my own so deeply that I had to sit down on an old stool, the dusty air thick around me. That evening, Thomas took me to see his new painting. He had rented a small, cold studio space. The rent paid for by a commission to paint a portrait of a wealthy merchant's wife. In the center of the room, on a large easel, was his masterpiece. It was a portrait of me, but it wasn't the me that looked back from the mirror. He had painted me not in the bookshop, but standing on a cliff overlooking a wild, stormy sea. The wind was whipping my hair, and my dress was the color of the sky, and in my eyes, he had painted a universe of longing, strength, and an almost unbearable sadness. It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I had ever seen. That's how I see you, he said softly, standing behind me. You're not meant for quiet rooms and dusty shelves, Ilara. You're meant for the storm. Tears streamed down my face, because I knew he was right. But which storm was I meant for? The one I had chosen for myself, the demanding and noble path of nursing, or the wild, unpredictable storm of a life with him? He took me in his arms, and I clung to him, the smell of turpentine and oil paint filling my senses. "Don't go to the school," he whispered into my hair. "Stay with me. We can make it work. We'll have no money, and it will be hard, but we'll have each other. We'll have this. Just stay." His plea was a siren song, promising a life of passion, of art, of love. It was everything the romantic part of my soul craved. I could picture it so clearly, our little flat, filled with his paintings and my books, struggling together, but happy. I went back to my room at the boarding house that night with his words echoing in my ears. The enrollment forms for the nursing school were on my small table, waiting. The deadline was in 2 days. I sat on my bed, my mind a raging sea of confusion and conflict. I was 19 years old, and I was facing a choice that I knew, with absolute certainty, would define the rest of my life. My hand, as if with a will of its own, went to my pocket and closed around the cool, smooth metal of my mother's locket. My promise to her felt like a betrayal to Thomas. My love for Thomas felt like a betrayal to my mother and to the girl who had left home with so much hope. I felt it then. The crushing weight of being truly, completely lost. My fingers fumbled with the clasp. It was time. It was finally time to open it. The little room was silent except for the frantic beating of my own heart and the distant, muffled sounds of the city. My fingers, trembling slightly, worked at the tiny, stubborn clasp of the locket. For so long, this object had been a symbol of a promise, a talisman I held on to but dared not explore. Now, it felt like my last resort, a final oracle, in a moment of impossible choice. With a faint click, the locket sprang open. I held my breath, half expecting some magical glow or a miniature portrait of my mother. But it was neither of those things. Inside, nestled against the worn velvet lining, were two things. On one side, there was a minuscule, faded photograph, no bigger than my thumbnail. It was a picture of a young woman I didn't recognize, with a determined chin and eyes that held a familiar spark. She was standing in front of a building with large columns, a book held tightly in her hands. On the other side, tucked into a tiny fold, was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle with age. The print was so small I had to hold it right up to the dim light of my bedside lamp. It was a short article, dated 1928. The headline read, "Local woman first in family to attend university." The article was about my mother. My mother, who I had only ever known with flour on her hands and the scent of the earth on her clothes. My mother, who had married my father at 18 and settled into the quiet, predictable life of a village wife. The young woman in the photograph was her, and the article detailed her acceptance into a teacher's college, her dreams of bringing education and knowledge back to the rural communities. I sat there, stunned, the two halves of the locket lying open in my palm. My mind reeled as it tried to piece this new reality together. My mother, the woman who had encouraged my dream, had once had a powerful dream of her own, a dream she had given up. Why? I didn't know for sure, but I could guess. Perhaps it was the pressure of her family, the expectations of the time, or perhaps she had fallen in love with my father and chosen a different path. Suddenly, her words to me on the night before I left took on a whole new meaning. "There are different kinds of courage," she had said. She hadn't just been talking about me and my father. She had been talking about herself. She had lived a life of quiet courage, channeling her own unfulfilled ambitions into love for her family and into the fierce determination to see her daughter have the chances she never did. This locket wasn't a magic charm, meant to give me an easy answer. It wasn't a message telling me what to do. It was a mirror. It was showing me that my struggle was not unique. It was showing me the sacrifice that had been made for me, the torch that had been passed to me. My mother had given up her dream of teaching, and in doing so, had given me the strength to pursue my own. Her sacrifice wasn't meant to be a chain that bound me to a single path, but rather the foundation upon which I could build my own future, whatever that might be. I thought of Thomas, of his passionate heart and the beautiful, difficult life he was offering me. I loved him. Oh, I loved him with an ache so profound it felt like a part of my very soul. A life with him would be a life of art, of emotion, of beauty. Then I thought of the nursing school. I thought of the crisp, white uniform, the challenge of the studies, the ability to offer comfort and healing to people in their most vulnerable moments. It was a different kind of passion, a quieter one, perhaps, but one that had been a steady, guiding star for so long. Closing the locket, I finally understood. The choice wasn't about love versus ambition. It wasn't about Thomas versus nursing. It was about which path was truly mine. My mother's story showed me that choosing one path doesn't necessarily negate the other, but that a choice made out of fear or obligation, rather than conviction, could lead to a life of quiet regret. I fell asleep that night with the locket clutched in my hand, and for the first time in weeks, my dreams were calm. I dreamed of my mother as a young girl, her face bright with hope. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The agonizing conflict in my heart had settled. I knew what I had to do. It was a decision that would bring both immense pain and a quiet, certain strength. I walked to the hospital that morning, the enrollment forms held firmly in my hand. The air was crisp and cool, and the city seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. I filled out the forms, my hand steady, and paid the fees for the first term with the money I had so painstakingly saved. It was done. I had chosen my storm. Now came the hardest part. I had to tell Thomas. I found him at his studio, the smell of oil paint and turpentine hitting me as I opened the door. He was working intently on a new canvas, a chaotic swirl of dark colors. He looked up when I entered, and his face broke into a hopeful smile. "Elara," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. "Thomas," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "I came to tell you. I enrolled this morning. I start in the autumn." The smile vanished from his face. The light in his beautiful blue eyes seemed to flicker and die. He didn't speak for a long time. He just stared at me, and in his gaze I saw a storm of emotions: shock, hurt, betrayal. "I see," he finally said, his voice flat and cold. "So you've made your choice." "It wasn't a choice against you, Thomas," I pleaded, taking a step towards him. "It was a choice for me. It's something I have to do, for myself, for my mother." "Your mother," he scoffed, a bitter edge to his voice. "What does she have to do with this, with us?" "Everything," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. I tried to explain about the locket, about the dream she had given up, but my words felt clumsy and inadequate. To him, it just sounded like an excuse. "So, that's it, then," he said, turning his back to me and staring at his canvas. "The nurse goes off to her noble calling, and the poor artist is left behind. It's a classic story, isn't it?" "Please don't do this," I sobbed. "Don't make it ugly." "I think it's a little late for that," he said, still not looking at me. "You should go, Elara. You have your new life to prepare for." His words were like daggers. I stood there for a moment, hoping he would turn around, hoping he would see the agony in my face. But he remained frozen, his back a rigid wall between us. I left his studio with a part of my heart shattered into a million pieces. The walk back to the boarding house was a blur of tears. I had done the right thing, the thing I knew I had to do, but it had cost me the man I loved. The victory of achieving my dream was hollow, filled with the bitter taste of loss. I had chosen my path, but now I had to walk it alone, with only the ghost of a shared dream to keep me company. Starting my training at St. Jude's Hospital was like being plunged into an entirely new world, one that operated on a strict diet of discipline, disinfectant, and exhaustion. The romantic notions I had harbored about nursing, of gently wiping fevered brows and offering soothing words, were quickly scrubbed away by the harsh reality of the wards. Our lives were governed by the shrill ring of the matron's bell, a sound that dictated when we woke, when we ate, when we worked, and when we fell into our beds, too tired to even dream. We lived in a stark dormitory, our beds lined up in neat, impersonal rows. The starched white uniforms were stiff and unforgiving, and our hair had to be pinned up so tightly it gave us headaches. We were no longer individuals with pasts and passions. We were nurse, a collective entity sworn to obedience and hard work. The matron was a formidable woman with a gaze that could curdle milk. She believed that compassion was a weakness, and that efficiency was next to godliness. "You are here to work, not to weep," she would say, her voice as crisp as our aprons. "Tears will not set a broken bone or cool a fever." The work was relentless. We were on our feet for 12-hour shifts, scrubbing floors, changing bedpans, sterilizing instruments, and learning the intricate science of medicine. The hospital was a world of visceral, raw humanity. I saw things I never imagined I would see: the miracle of a baby's first breath, the quiet dignity of an old man's last. I learned to dress gruesome wounds without flinching, to administer injections with a steady hand, and to comfort grieving families with a quiet strength I didn't know I possessed. There were moments of profound connection. I remember holding the hand of a young soldier who had lost a leg, listening as he whispered about his sweetheart back home. I remember singing a lullaby to a frightened child in the polio ward, her small hand clutching my finger as if it were a lifeline. In these moments, I knew I had made the right choice. This was a different kind of love, not the romantic, passionate love I had shared with Thomas, but a deep, abiding love for humanity in all its fragility and resilience. This was my purpose. But oh, the loneliness was a constant, aching presence. In the dead of night, after a grueling shift, I would lie in my narrow bed, the sounds of the water cough, a quiet moan, the squeak of a trolley's wheels, drifting through the darkness. And in those quiet moments, my thoughts would inevitably turn to Thomas. I missed him with the physical pain. I missed his laugh, the intensity in his eyes, the way he could make the greyest London day feel like a work of art. I wondered if he was painting, if his exhibition had been a success, if he ever thought of me. I wrote him a letter once, a long, rambling letter trying to explain my heart, but I never sent it. My pride, and the cold finality of his last words, stopped me. One day, about a year into my training, I was walking past a small gallery on my day off, and there, in the window, was a painting that stopped me in my tracks. It was a cityscape, a dark, moody, and magnificent depiction of London in the rain. The brushstrokes were bold and full of a raw, almost angry energy. But what caught my eye was the signature in the corner, T. Renshaw. My heart hammered against my ribs. I went inside. The gallery was small, but it was filled with his work. His style had changed. It was darker, more melancholic, but also more powerful. He was painting the city's soul, just as he had always wanted to, but now there was a profound sadness in his work, a sense of loss that I felt in my own bones, and then I saw it, in a corner by itself. It was the portrait he had painted of me, the girl on the cliff, facing the storm. A small red sticker on the frame indicated it had been sold. Someone else owned my face, my story, as captured by his hand. Seeing it felt like a fresh wound. I left the gallery feeling shaken. He was succeeding. He was becoming the artist he was always meant to be, and he was doing it without me. The thought was both a comfort and a torment. Life on the wards continued, its relentless pace. I hardened. I had to. I learned to build walls around my heart to withstand the daily onslaught of pain and loss. I became a good nurse, an efficient nurse, just as the matron demanded. But I worried that the gentle soul Mr. Abernathy had spoken of was being eroded, replaced by a cool professionalism. The turning point came during a particularly harsh winter. A flu epidemic swept through the city, and the hospital was overwhelmed. We were working 18-hour days, running on fumes and weak tea. The wards were full to overflowing, and the sound of coughing was a constant, rasping symphony. Death was a frequent visitor. One night, a new patient was brought in, an elderly man who had collapsed in the street. He was delirious with fever, his breathing shallow and ragged. As I was settling him in, taking his pulse, he opened his eyes and looked at me. His gaze was cloudy, but there was a flicker of recognition. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. My blood ran cold. It was Mr. Abernathy. He was so frail, a shadow of the kind, robust man who had saved me from the rain all those years ago. I made sure he got the best care, hovering over him, willing him to fight. In his moments of lucidity, we talked. He told me he had sold the bookshop a year ago. His health had been failing, and he couldn't manage it anymore. "I'm proud of you, my dear," he whispered, his hand frail in mine. "You found your storm. You're a wonderful nurse." "It's because of you," I told him, my voice choked with tears. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." He smiled weakly. "We all just help each other find our way home." He passed away 3 days later, holding my hand. His death hit me harder than any I had witnessed before. He had been my anchor, my family in this city. His loss left a gaping hole in my life. After his funeral, I felt utterly adrift. The walls I had built around my heart came crumbling down, and I was left with a grief so profound it felt like I was drowning. It was then, in the depths of my sorrow, that I truly understood the lesson of my mother's locket. It wasn't just about choosing a path. It was about the strength needed to walk it, especially when it was littered with loss and heartbreak. My nursing wasn't just a job, it was a commitment to humanity, and that required not a hard heart, but a resilient one. A heart that could break and still find a way to heal. A heart that could absorb sorrow and still find the capacity for compassion. Mr. Abernathy's death was a crucible. It burned away the last of my girlish naivety and forged me into the woman I was meant to become. I had lost the man I loved, and now I had lost my dearest friend. But I was still standing. The storm had not broken me. It had, in fact, taught me how to stand firm, how to bend without breaking, and how to find light in the deepest darkness. I was no longer just a girl with a dream. I was a nurse, forged in the fires of life and loss, and my journey was far from over. After I graduated from nursing school, I poured myself into my work. For years, it was my entire world. I rose through the ranks at St. Jude's, eventually becoming a ward sister, my own starched cap a symbol of authority and experience. I was respected, I was good at my job, and I found a deep, abiding satisfaction in the life I had chosen. The sharp, personal ache of losing Thomas softened over time, transforming into a gentle, melancholy memory, like a pressed flower in an old book. I never married. There were opportunities, of course, kind doctors and charming patients who showed an interest, but my heart, I think, was always reserved. Part of it was given to my profession, and a small, quiet part of it would always belong to a dark-haired artist with blue eyes. It wasn't a sad life, not at all. It was a full life, rich with purpose. I had answered the call I'd heard so long ago, and I had no regrets. I kept in touch with my mother through letters. My father, bless his stubborn heart, eventually came around. When he saw me in my uniform for the first time, a look of grudging pride in his eyes was all the apology I ever needed. When my parents grew old and frail, I was the one who was able to care for them, using my skills to give them comfort in their final years. It was a profound, full-circle moment, bringing my city life and my country roots together in an act of love and duty. After I retired, I moved here, to this quiet little house filled with my things, my memories, and that's where you find me today. A woman in her late 70s, with hands that have seen far too much, and a heart that has somehow managed to hold it all. Now, let's go back to this morning, to the chiming of that old grandfather clock. After it took me back to that frosty morning I left home, my mind didn't stop there. It kept wandering, as old minds do. And I found myself thinking about Thomas, as I sometimes still do on quiet afternoons. On a whim, a silly impulse really, I did something I'd never done before. I have one of those newfangled computer things, you see. My grandnephew set it up for me. I typed his name into the search bar. Thomas Renshaw, artist. My breath caught in my throat. There he was, page after page. He had become quite famous, it turned out. A celebrated British painter, known for his moody, atmospheric landscapes and his powerful, emotional portraits. There were articles about him, interviews. He had married, had a family. He had lived a full life, just as I had. And then I saw it. An article from just a few weeks ago, announcing a major retrospective of his life's work at one of the biggest galleries in London. And there was one painting they used for all the publicity. The headline read, "The Heart of the Storm, Renshaw's Lifelong Muse." It was my portrait, the painting of the girl on the cliff. The article included a quote from a recent interview with Thomas. No, an old man himself, with white hair and the same intense eyes I remembered so well. The interviewer asked him about the painting, who the girl was, and this is what he said. Her name was Alara. She was my first love, a long, long time ago. I was just a boy, and I wanted her to choose a life with me, but she was a force of nature. She had her own path to follow, her own storm to face. I was angry when she left, devastated, but it took me years to understand the gift she gave me. She taught me that love isn't about possession. It's about letting someone be who they are meant to be. Her leaving broke my heart, but it also made me the artist I am. All of my work, in some way, has been about trying to understand the strength I saw in her eyes. I never saw her again. I hope she found what she was looking for. I sat there, in front of that glowing screen, with tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness or regret, but tears of completion, of understanding. All these years, I thought our story was a tragedy, a story of a love that was lost, but it wasn't. It was a love story of a different kind. Our love wasn't meant to be a cozy hearth to warm ourselves by for a lifetime. It was meant to be a fire that forged us both into the people we were destined to become. He had found his art through losing me, and I had found my strength through choosing my own path. We had set each other free. So you see, dear, when I look at my reflection in my teaspoon now, I don't just see an old woman with wrinkled hands. I see the girl who stood on a lonely road with a locket in her pocket. I see the young nurse, terrified but determined. I see the woman who learned to love and to lose, and to find purpose in the spaces in between. Life rarely gives you a straight road. It's full of forks and unexpected turns and heartbreaking choices. And we so often think we've made the wrong choice when things get difficult or painful. But what I've learned, in all my years, is that there are no wrong choices. Not really. Every path, every decision, every loss, holds a lesson. The key isn't to avoid the storms, because you can't. The key is to learn how to stand on that cliff, feel the wind in your hair, and have the courage to face whatever comes. To know that even a broken heart can lead you to your greatest masterpiece. That's what my mother's locket really taught me. The strength wasn't inside the silver casing. It was inside me all along, just as it is inside you. My dear, remember that now. How about another biscuit? This old woman has talked far too much. It's your turn to tell me a story.